This episode is brought to you by Rune. Click the link in the description box below for more information.
Why might we spend up to $3,000 or 3,000 euros on a pair of very high-end headphones? I first tackled this question earlier this year in covering the Rosson RAD-0 and the Dan Clark Ether 2. These are both very high-end headphones. These are incredible headphones. But, you know, they have different qualities, different reasons why I like them. One of the reasons I love very expensive headphones is that we get far more for our money than if we spent $3,000 on a pair of loudspeakers. And so we're going to continue that line of thought today with the Focal Stellia from France. Now, the other reason that I think headphones are so fantastic is that they effectively remove the room that would otherwise colour our loudspeakers, because every room adds coloration to every pair of loudspeakers that play in them. So you might even be able to hear a little bit of my room today because I'm sat in a different position and I'm talking towards my commode, which is reflecting my voice. So you might hear a little bit of that. We don't get any of that nonsense or any of those problems with a pair of headphones. And I'd much rather take a $3,000 pair of headphones than a $3,000 pair of loudspeakers. But in removing the room from the loudspeaker equation, what we do with headphones is we relocate the room effectively to the ear cup. The ear cup here is essentially a mini room that sits next to our ear. So obviously what manufacturers do is they, in this case, this is a closed back headphone. They line the inside of the ear cup to prevent reflective sound coming back at the ear. With open headphones, they don't have to do that so much. They have to worry about turbulence, air turbulence going out and coming in, but these are closed. And in the case of Focal here, what they've done is they've angled the driver towards the ear, so it's not pointing straight out. And we've got some very nice actually, leather ear cups here. This is memory foam, I believe. So these are beautifully made actually, they really are. And I think it's important to point out that these are handmade in France. And I was at the factory at the very start of last year. But one thing, we were not allowed to film any of the headphone related assembly or manufacturing. There was one point where we were shown a guy in a glass room wearing essentially a spacesuit to handle the beryllium that is used in their tweeters, but also on the driver here. This is a 4-centimeter beryllium driver. And that beryllium driver is M-shaped, so it sort of curves up like that, and then in the middle like this. So it's not a traditionally shaped driver. It is surrounded by a copper voice coil. And I believe that the input impedance of these headphones is 35 ohms, which means we can run them from a dongle DAC or a portable player. We don't necessarily need a high-powered headphone amp to get decent sound from these. And this is every bit a luxury product because we've got a stainless steel ear cup, real leather and cushioned headband. And not only that, not only does this headphone feel like a true luxury product. I know YouTubers like to use the word premium, but I think this goes further. This is definitely luxurious. And that luxuriousness starts not just with the headphone, but also with the packaging. I have never seen a headphone as well packaged as this. Now, a lot of headphones can come in just fairly utilitarian cardboard boxes with foam packaging and then a fairly rudimentary inner box. Some come in Pelican style cases or metal, I guess you'd call them briefcases really. But this is just another level because we've got a travel case here, and I'll show you the inside of this because it really is very nice. So you'd have the headphones sit here and your cable goes there. It comes with two different cables, I'll show you those. because these arrive in this sort of fold out, I think it's a faux leather book, but like this. And so this is the balance cable. I have used this briefly, but I've been mainly doing my listening with the single-ended cable, which is also quite short for use with portable players and the like. And I haven't even opened this. I think this is documentation. I don't actually know what this is for, but it connotes such a strong sense of 3,000 euros, really, more than any other 3,000 euro headphone that I've ever seen. If we're talking about comfort, as somebody who wears glasses, I really appreciate with these headphones how the side clamping force is not especially tight. It's certainly a long way from the side clamping force that we get from the Rosson RAD-0. And normally with those, I take my glasses off to listen, but with these, I don't have to. And so they're a little bit like, well, they're not quite as lightly clamped as the Darko Ether 2. They're a bit more like the Meze Empyrean in that respect. So we have a sort of a Goldilocks situation when it comes to clamping force. Just enough to keep them on the head. Yes, I can lean forward. Should we try that? I can lean forward without them falling off, no problem. And yes, as I've said many times before, comparisons are very, very important to me. So in mentioning the Darko Ether 2, the Meze Empyrean and the Rosson RAD-0, I do that because that lets you know that I have three other very high-end, $3,000-ish headphones here with which to compare the Focal Stellia. But if you're wondering how the Focal Stellia compare to another headphone that I have not yet mentioned, I'm really sorry, I have no idea. Now, I did most of my listening using the DCS Bartók that you see behind me here, and I'm on a bit of a CD trip at the moment, so I fed the Bartók not through its network input, but using ASEBU from the direct stream memory player from Audio. But I also used here and there and out on the balcony a Hugo2 with the to-go portable streaming attachment. Make no mistake, the Focal Stellia are easily one of the most detailed sounding headphones that I've ever heard. And they are incredible at unraveling the complex layers of music, especially an album like this. This is Eno and Hyde's High Life. Brian Eno and then Carl Hyde, who's the lead singer from Underworld. This album came out in about 2014. It's called High Life for a reason. There was a lot of sort of African high life guitars on it, but there are so many layers in many of these songs. There's no problem for the Stellia. And I know that sounds a little bit weird to say something like that because you're like, well, where is it a problem? But a lot of other headphones, you know, something like the Meze Empyrean is a little bit more congealed. And that incredible level of transparency or detail retrieval also showed up again on the Black Dog's Spanners. This is an electronic album from '95. And track 15 is called The End of Time, but I'd never really paid attention to that. I only looked it up because I wanted to know what track to talk about in this video, because there's a vocal sample that's heavily treated right at the start. And it's up until the Focal Stellia, it was kind of hard. Well, it wasn't as easy to hear what the vocal sample was saying, and it was The End of Time. Now, I'd never noticed it before in that way. The Focal seems to just really just bring it to the surface, and I think that's incredible. But more detail means greater listener exposure to subtleties like a little organ here, a cymbal hit over here, and then like a bass roll in the middle here, which is exactly what we get on Prefab Sprout's Andromeda Heights, which I think is from '97. This is a very lush sounding album. It's very old fashioned songwriting. Some people might call it a bit cheesy sounding, and I would agree with them. If you think that just because you've never heard of the artists that I'm mentioning in these videos, if you're assuming that they must be all electronic music, no, you have to pay attention. Prefab sprout, not electronic music. Instrumental separation is not as overt on the Focal Stellia as it is on the Dan Clark Ether 2. The Ether 2 aren't quite as meaty, but the Focal still give plenty of room for different instruments, like those heard on Andromeda Heights, plenty of room to breathe. So we get the separation, but it's not tantalizing. It's not like, oh wow, that's over there and that's over there. It's like, oh yeah, that's there and that's there. And it's a bit more measured in that approach. And a lot of that detail from the Focal comes from the mid-range. Vocals really pop forward. Even Joey Burns' quite, I guess, suppressed vocal on this record, Calexico's Hot Rail. Yeah, you get a lot of presence region action, but not too much. It's just the right side of, I won't say tolerable because that means I'm having to put up with things I'm really not. But presence region on the Focal Stellia is a little bit stronger than, say, the Meze Empyrean, probably a lot stronger than the Rosson RAD-0. So unlike the Meze, the Focal Stellia are sort of closer to the Dan Clark in that they're much more alert, they're more front foot, especially with the mids and the upper mids. I'm not saying there's necessarily a peak in the frequency response, I'm just saying that we get this feeling of greater vocal presence on the Calexico album. There's a lot of horn section stuff on here, and that really steps forward into, I guess, into your head. I want to say normally with the speakers, I would say into the room, but with the headphones on, it's like into your head. So with those horns, this French headphone communicates a better sense of music's liquidity. So yeah, on here, you want to hear the blat of those horns and you want it to sound wet, not dry. And I think the Focal are better than the Dan Clark in that respect. Let's talk about bass, and in doing so, let's introduce the Power of 7 by System 7. If you like the Orb, but like the sort of the more club-focused aspects of the Orb, the more dance music rather than the ambient side, you'll really like this System 7 album. The lead track, Interstate, I think it's killer, mainly because it samples a hook from a track from krautrock band Neu. So that gives it the sort of 70s influence, so that the rest of it sounds more like the Orb. And I think actually Alex Patterson's on this record. Anyway, in listening to this with the Focals and then with the other headphones, I discovered that the Focal do go as low as all of the other headphones. Of course they do, it's a headphone. I mean, it'd be very unusual for a headphone not to be full range. But the bass, the lower frequencies are on a tighter leash with Focal. That may be because of the way they vented the ear cup, because the ear cup is vented to control the bass response, but it's not big, it's not voluptuous, it doesn't slam anywhere near as hard as, say, the Rosson RAD-0. So if you're into bass slam, that's the way you want to go there. The Focal, it's much more measured and restrained. I bought this for €10 recently. This is David Gilmour, as you know from Pink Floyd, with the Orb. We just mentioned the Orb, so I thought I'd play an Orb CD. This is more sort of bass-heavy ambient music, but it does have a kind of an insistent thud to it. Thud doesn't sound very good, does it? But it's more articulate than that. And I guess I would say that the bass articulation on the Focal is slightly better than the Meze Empyrean. Just slightly, but it's noticeable. And this album, Metallic Spheres, reveals a sort of elastic quality. Like when you hear a bass kick drum, it sort of springs like a rubber ball. I've mentioned this before, but it feels, yeah, more elastic when it hits with this album, with the Focal, than say the Meze or the Dan Clark. But on microdynamics, the Stellia just wiped the floor with the competition. And that was really noticeable on High Life, where smaller sounds have more of an impact on the overall music painting. Because without, well, some of these tracks have vocals, not all of them do. And with the sort of intricate guitar work, you want microdynamic flair, so little snaps and pops and plucks really pop out of the headphone. But this Stellia is not what I would call a rich sounding headphone. It's not as fleshy as the Meze Empyrean, certainly not as fleshy as the RAD-0, probably slightly fleshier than the Dan Clark Ether 2, because there's a crispness to the Stellia, a bit like with the Ether 2, but not quite as much, that doesn't really present as overtly in the Meze or the Rossons. So if you like a crisp sounding headphone, the Focal is definitely something you should have a listen to. On communicating a recording's inner space and overall ambience, I don't think the Focal are quite as good as the Ether 2, but they're not as intimate sounding as the Rosson RAD-0, which really kind of, you know, dim the lights and bring the ceiling much lower. So they're probably closer to the Meze Empyrean in that respect, if you want to hear the recording space. But one of the most unusual findings in doing this four-way comparison was that even though the Rosson RAD-0 is an open back headphone, it sounds more intimate and more closed than the Focal, which is a closed back headphone. And I think this is possibly the Focal's greatest sort of party trick, is that even though it's closed back, you don't really notice it as much as you do with other closed back headphones. It doesn't feel as like you're cocooned in as much. It really does feel very open, and staging goes pretty wide to here. It's not like just to here, it's sort of out here somewhere on some recordings like that System 7 album. So the idea that if you want the best sound quality from a headphone, you've got to go open back, it's just the sound of head-fi idealism. You know, people just sticking to like one way of thinking and being idealistic instead of pragmatic. And I like to think of myself as a more pragmatic listener, and I'd say with the Focal being a closed back headphones, it sounds more like an open, and it does away with this idealism that open backs are best and closed backs will always be inferior. I don't think that's true at all. So that's one of my major takeaways from doing this Focal Stellia video coverage. I think the mocha/copper colorway of the Focal Stellia might divide a room. Some people love it, some people do not. I'm kind of like about it, but if you're putting headphones on your head and you're not leaving the house, who cares? Like, it's only really, well, you don't even have to look at them, do you? It's just people around you. The idea that a closed back can go out into the street is still valid. Would I take the Stellia out into the street with a dongle DAC? No, I wouldn't. Would I listen to it out on my balcony with the Chord Tufa? Absolutely, yeah, I would, and I have. And that's nice, but yeah, I don't think you'll be taking these out in the street or on a plane, or maybe on a train, maybe. I don't know, I think they're still a home listening headphone in my book. But they are possibly the most luxurious headphone top to bottom. So right from when you open them to pulling out the accessories to putting them on your head. Focal seem to have ticked every box to ensure that people feel that they are getting their money's worth when they're laying down 3,000 euros or 3,000 US dollars. If you liked this video, then please hit the like button down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio, in that I also listen to headphones as well as loudspeakers. I cannot stress how important it is for me to listen to headphones as well as speakers, because headphones, as we said at the start, they remove the room. So I can hear more of what the recording should sound like if the room were not present. Yes, there are limitations. You don't get the kind of the physical impact of loudspeakers, but it gives you a look at what recording should really sound like. You know, if you want to get close to what they heard in the studio, it's headphones all the way. And for me, high-end headphones are, I guess, where my interest lies. Although I am going to do a video about entry-level headphones at some point later this year. But anyway, if you dig that attitude, please subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.